In our first lesson this morning, we hear from the Acts of the Apostles, we hear of Tabitha, who in Greek is called Dorcas. Now, we probably are familiar with the name Tabitha. That's Darren and Samantha's daughter, right? But no one seems to be named Dorcas anymore. And I think last night we figured out why. As a duke has a duchess, a dork has a Dorcas. So no one wants to be named Dorcas. But that's who we hear about, and we don't talk about Tabitha, also known as Dorcas, very much. So I thought we'd talk about her this morning. What do we know about her? She lived in Joppa. She was devoted to charity and good works. She was a sower. And her community was devastated at her loss. Her community seems to primarily be made up of widows who gathered in her home and for whom she had made many clothes. In the time of Jesus, if you suddenly became a widow in your old age, you often would be in a bit of trouble because you had no way to support yourself. So the early church made a commitment to serving two groups, widows and orphans. Because these are people, because of the culture of the time, who seem to need the support, seem to be in need of being defended. We can also assume that Tabitha, or Dorcas, was a person of means. In other words, she may have been a widow herself, but she was very wealthy. She was able to buy the cloth. She was able to make clothes for other people. The other interesting thing is, since we're given her Hebrew name, Tabitha, and her Greek name, Dorcas, we can assume that the people who gathered in her home, the widows and the poor, were both Greek and Hebrew. And this is before those kind of ecumenical things were really happening. The Greeks called her Dorcas instead of the Hebrew name Tabitha, but she didn't mind because both names mean gazelle. And gazelle is a rather pleasant image to have for your name, so she didn't mind what people called her. Dorcas inspired her friends, and even this brief reference in Acts continues to inspire many people long after her eventual other death. Her name lives on in Dorcas societies, founded by Christian women as vehicles for serving the poor. A Dorcas society is a local group of people, often women, usually based in a church, with a mission for providing clothing for the poor. There's been a number of Dorcas societies throughout the years. They were in their height in the 1800s, but there are still Dorcas societies around the world providing clothing and other physical needs for the poor. Though Dorcas societies were most popular in the 19th century, there is a famous painting by Edwin Long that imagines a Dorcas society gathering in the 6th century. In the center of the painting is a woman dressed in white who is seated on a chair, and she is offering a coat to another woman who is kneeling before her. To the right in the picture are women waiting to receive their gifts. The left half of the picture is a number of women who have gathered, who have gathered to cut fabric, to thread their needles, to compare stitches, and craft garments to be given away. It's a good painting. Edwin Long is the painter. If you Google Edwin Long Dorcas, it'll come right up. There's a poem by George MacDonald, also written in the 19th century. It's titled Dorcas, and it ties her skills with a needle to Jesus and his teaching. The poet writes, "If I might guess, then guess I would, that amid the gathered folk, this gentle Dorcas one day stood and heard when Jesus spoke. She saw the woven seamless coat, half envious for his sake. O happy hand, she said, that wrought the honored thing to make. Her eyes with longing tears grow dim. She never can come nigh. To work one service poor for him, for whom she glad would die. But hark, he speaks, O precious word, and she has need indeed. When did we see thee naked, Lord, and clothe thee in thy need? The king shall answer, inasmuch as to brethren ye did it, even to the least of such ye did it unto me. Home, home she went and plied the loom, and Jesus poor arrayed. She died, they wept about the room, and showed the coats she made. The biblical text gives us only 7 verses about Dorcas the disciple. Her witness and her legacy, however, are much greater than any word count. What does this example of Dorcas the disciple teach us? Among other things, I think that it shows us that in the end, it is right actions, or orthopraxis, and not right beliefs, or orthodoxy, that matter the most. Let me explain that a little bit more by quoting Lutheran preacher David Luce on this topic. When I was in college, one of my favorite subjects was psychology. Then, as now, I was fascinated by why we behave as we do. One of the most interesting things I learned in my first psychology class was that while I tended to think that belief shapes behavior, that is, our actions follow our convictions, the truth turned out to be the exact opposite. More often than not, our behavior shapes our beliefs. Ask people to put a small political sign in their yard, and their support for that candidate rises dramatically. Get folks to start recycling for a month, and their commitment to the environment goes well beyond what it was before they began recycling. In short, we tend to justify our actions by shaping our convictions and even identity, often unconsciously, to explain and support those actions. Which means that our popular exclamation, "I'll believe it when I see it," should probably be modified slightly, "I'll believe it when I do it." All of this helps me make sense of what Jesus is saying, said David Luce. Yes, those who believe in him are part of his flock and follow him. And at the same time, those who are following him are more likely to believe in him and identify as part of his flock. We tend to separate out believing and following. But according to both Jesus and modern psychologists, the two actually go together. Or to put it another way, it is really, really hard to be an armchair Christian. Only by getting out of our chairs, or maybe getting out of our pews, and actually living the Christian life, do we come to deeper faith and commitment. St. Francis of Assisi made the same point in an economy of words. St. Francis used to say, "Preach the gospel, and if you must, use words." This is what Dorcas did. She heard the call of her good shepherd, and she chose to follow that call. The call propelled her into action. Using what she knew, sewing, she did what she could do to alleviate the suffering of the poor friends all around her by making them clothing. No long debates about right beliefs, but concrete actions is how she chose to respond to her call. Each one of us is being called by Jesus this morning. May we remember Dorcas and respond to the call of our Good Shepherd with actions of love and grace that will transform the suffering in this world.